The stench of diesel and burnt coffee hangs in the air, thick as molasses. I've been stuck in this godforsaken diner for hours, watching the clock mock me, its hands frozen at midnight. Every time the door creaks open, my stomach does a backflip. It ain't ghosts or monsters coming through, it's worse. It's flesh and blood, each face a mirror reflecting my sins back at me. Donna, the waitress with eyes too knowing, keeps the coffee coming. She's seen my type before, truckers running from something. But the weight I'm hauling? It's crushing me, and I'm starting to think this pit stop might be my last. The name's Jake Holloway, and I've been driving big rigs for the better part of 25 years. Tonight, I'm holed up in this truck stop diner off Highway 20 in Nebraska, trying to wait out a storm that's been brewing for longer than I care to admit. I rolled in here about 3 hours ago, the sky turning an ugly shade of green that any trucker worth his salt knows means trouble. The parking lot was half full, a mix of semis and beat-up sedans huddled together like they were bracing for impact. The diner itself is nothing special, just another greasy spoon that dots the highways of America. Peeling vinyl booths, a counter with mismatched stools, and a menu that hasn't changed since the 70s. But something about this place feels off, like the air is a little too thick, the shadows a little too deep. I've been watching the other folks in here, and something's not right. They're all avoiding eye contact, hunched over their plates like they're guarding state secrets. Even Donna, who's been refilling my coffee religiously, seems to look through me rather than at me. After my third cup, I decided I'd rather take my chances with the storm. But when I tried to start up my rig, all I got was a sad whine from the engine. Cursing under my breath, I trudged back to the diner, the wind whipping at my jacket. That's when things started getting weird. As I pushed open the door, the bell chiming overhead, I locked eyes with a young woman sitting alone in a booth. For a second, my heart stopped. She was the spitting image of Sarah, a hitchhiker I picked up outside of Reno a few years back. I promised to take her all the way to Chicago, but I got spooked when she started talking about her abusive ex-boyfriend who might be following her. I left her at a truck stop in Colorado, in the middle of the night. The guilt has gnawed at me ever since. But it couldn't be her. Could it? I blinked, and the resemblance faded. Just my mind playing tricks, I told myself. I slid back into my booth, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The air in the diner seemed to press down on me, heavy with unspoken accusations. Little did I know, my night was about to get a whole lot worse. As the night wore on, the diner seemed to shrink around me. Every face I saw stirred up memories I'd rather forget. There was an older man hunched over the counter, his withered hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. He looked just like Mr. Thompson, whose dog I'd accidentally hit on a dark country road years ago. I'd panicked and driven off, the sound of his anguished cries echoing in my ears for miles. I tried to distract myself by fiddling with my phone, but there was no signal. The storm outside had intensified, rain lashing against the windows in angry sheets. I was trapped, both by the weather and by the growing unease in my gut. A teenager walked in, shaking water from his jacket. For a moment, I saw my son Tyler in him, the son I hadn't seen in 5 years. The resemblance was so strong it made my chest ache. I'd missed his high school graduation, too caught up in a long-haul job to make it back in time. That was the last straw for him and for his mother. They'd cut ties after that, leaving me alone with the open road and my regrets. The conversations around me seemed to blur into a single, accusing murmur. I caught snippets that made my skin prickle, left them there. Never even stopped. How could anyone? I tried to convince myself it was just paranoia, maybe even hallucinations from too much caffeine and too little sleep. But the feeling of being watched, being judged, was overwhelming. I considered making a break for it, storm be damned. But as I stood up, my legs wobbling, Donna appeared at my elbow. "Everything all right, hon?" she asked, her voice laced with concern that felt more like a threat. I need some air," I mumbled. She put a hand on my arm, gentle but firm. "Why don't you come with me for a minute? There's something you need to see." My heart pounding, I followed her towards a door marked private. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but my feet moved forward of their own accord. As Donna reached for the doorknob, I braced myself for whatever horror awaited me on the other side. The room was small, lit by a single bare bulb. But it wasn't the size that made my breath catch in my throat. The walls were covered with newspaper clippings, police reports, and photographs. My eyes darted from one to another, a cold sweat breaking out on my forehead. They were all about the same incident, a hit-and-run accident from 5 years ago. An accident I'd caused and fled from, leaving a man to die on a lonely stretch of highway. The victim's name jumped out at me, Donald Thompson. Suddenly, it all clicked into place. The old man at the counter wasn't Mr. Thompson, whose dog I'd killed. He was Donald's father. The diner wasn't some supernatural purgatory. It was a carefully orchestrated confrontation, planned by the victim's family to force me to face my crimes. I'm still here, waiting. The police are on their way, Donna tells me. Part of me wants to run, to disappear into the night like I've done so many times before. But I'm tired of running. As the first hints of dawn break through the diner's grimy windows, I make my choice. Whatever comes next, I'll face it. It's time to take responsibility for the long, dark road I've traveled. The door chimes again, and I look up, expecting to see uniformed officers. Instead, I see a face I never thought I'd see again. My son, Tyler, steps into the diner. The last thing I remember is the glare of headlights in my rearview mirror. Now, I'm standing in a rest area I don't recognize, my watch frozen at 11:37 p.m. The air feels thick, almost syrupy, and an unnatural silence blankets everything. As I walk towards the restroom, my footsteps echo unnaturally loud on the cracked pavement. A flyer on the bulletin board catches my eye. It's advertising a concert from 5 years ago. My heart races as I spot a payphone, relief flooding through me. But when I lift the receiver, all I hear is a voice whispering, "You shouldn't have stopped here." I've been on the road for what feels like days, my eyes heavy with exhaustion. The monotonous hum of tires on asphalt is only interrupted by the occasional growl of my empty stomach. When I spot a sign for a rest area, relief washes over me like a cool breeze. I pull in, gravel crunching under my wheels. The place seems deserted, but that's not unusual at this hour. As I step out to stretch my cramped muscles, something feels off. The air is unnaturally still, no breeze, no distant highway sounds. Glancing at my phone, I freeze. The time hasn't changed since I parked. A chill runs down my spine as I realize something's not right here. My name's Evelyn, and I'm a 32-year-old freelance photographer on my way to a shoot in the next state. I've made this drive countless times, but tonight feels different. Maybe it's the fatigue, or maybe it's this eerily quiet rest area. I decide to use the restroom and grab a snack from the vending machine. As I walk across the parking lot, my footsteps echo unnaturally loud in the silence. The area seems frozen in time. Outdated posters advertising events long past cling to notice boards, and a thick layer of dust covers every surface. The restroom door creaks as I push it open, the sound grating in the stillness. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzz and flicker, casting strange shadows. I catch my reflection in the grimy mirror. My usually neat brown hair is a mess, and dark circles underscore my hazel eyes. I look as exhausted as I feel. After splashing some water on my face, I head for the vending machine. It stands like a sentinel in the darkness, but as I get closer, I realize it's empty and unplugged. Frustrated and still hungry, I turn back to my car. That's when I notice it, a vehicle parked in the far corner of the lot. How did I miss it before? It's an old model, its once shiny paint now dull and peeling. It looks like it's been here for years, not hours. A sense of unease creeps over me. I pull out my phone, intending to call my sister, but there's no signal. Not even one bar. Odd, considering I had full coverage on the highway. I decide it's time to leave, this place giving me the creeps. But when I turn the key in the ignition, nothing happens. The engine doesn't even sputter. It's just dead. Popping the hood, I stare at the engine, hoping to spot an obvious problem. But cars have never been my strong suit, and in the dim light, everything looks foreign and intimidating. As I'm bent over the engine, a movement catches the corner of my eye. I whirl around, heart pounding, but there's nothing there. Just the empty parking lot and the silent buildings. but I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched. I've never considered myself paranoid, but right now, every shadow seems to hide a threat. I need to find help, or at least a working phone. There has to be an emergency call box around here somewhere, right? I spot a payphone near the vending machine and rush over, hope rising in my chest. But when I lift the receiver, there's no dial tone. Just dead silence. The emergency call box I find moments later is equally useless, its wires frayed and exposed. As night deepens, the darkness seems to close in around me. The few lights in the area begin to sputter and dim, as if struggling against the encroaching blackness. I've never been afraid of the dark, but right now, I'd give anything for a flashlight. My exploration leads me to an old maintenance shed tucked behind the main building. The door creaks open with a gentle push, and the musty smell of neglect hits me like a wall. Inside, I find stacks of logbooks dating back decades. Curiosity gets the better of me, and I start flipping through the most recent one. The entries start out normal enough: routine maintenance reports, supply orders, the occasional complaint about littering tourists. But as I read on, they become increasingly erratic. The last few pages are filled with paranoid ramblings about time slips and trapped souls. I slam the book shut, my hands shaking. Just then, I hear the unmistakable sound of an approaching car. Hope surges through me as I rush out, waving my arms frantically. But the vehicle zooms past without slowing, as if I'm invisible. That's when it hits me. I haven't seen a single car on the highway since I arrived. I retreat to my car, locking myself inside as panic starts to set in. The silence outside is oppressive, broken only by strange noises that make my skin crawl, footsteps crunching on gravel, whispers just beyond hearing range, the sound of metal dragging on concrete. I try to rationalize my situation. Maybe I'm hallucinating from exhaustion. Maybe this is all a vivid stress dream. But everything feels too real, too visceral to be a figment of my imagination. Exhaustion eventually overtakes me, and I doze off briefly. When I jerk awake, heart pounding, something's changed. My car has moved. I'm now parked in a different spot, facing the tree line instead of the road. I check my phone again, and my blood runs cold. Hours have passed, but the sky outside hasn't changed. It's still the same inky blackness, no hint of dawn on the horizon. I'm trapped in a nightmare, and I have no idea how to wake up. As false dawn approaches, I notice movement near the tree line. A figure emerges, an old man in a tattered uniform. He approaches slowly, his face etched with sadness and something else, resignation. "You shouldn't be here," he says, his voice raspy with disuse. "No one stops here anymore." He explains that the rest area was closed years ago after a series of unexplained disappearances. Those who linger too long find themselves trapped in a loop of time, unable to leave. The old man introduces himself as Frank, the former caretaker, now doomed to warn travelers away. He reaches into his pocket and pulls out a rusted key. "Your only chance is to leave before sunrise," he says, pressing the key into my hand. "Don't look back, no matter what you hear. And for God's sake, don't stop driving until you're far, far away from here." I sprint to my car, hands shaking as I insert the key. The engine roars to life, and I peel out of the parking lot, heart pounding. In my rearview mirror, I see Frank waving goodbye, his figure growing smaller. As I merge onto the highway, a weight lifts from my chest. But a nagging doubt remains: was it all in my head? One thing's for certain, I'll never stop at a rest area again. Miles down the road, I glance at my phone. It's working again, but the date is wrong. According to the display, I've lost an entire week. What happened to that time? I'm not sure I want to know. I've clocked over 2 million miles on America's highways, but nothing could have prepared me for that stretch of desert road. It was supposed to be my final haul before hanging up my keys for good. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues I'd never seen before, my rig's GPS went haywire. The fuel gauge froze, and the radio crackled with voices that shouldn't exist. That's when I realized this wasn't just another long haul, it was a journey into a trucker's worst nightmare. And the worst part? I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd driven this exact mile 1,000 times before. As the bizarre journey continued, I tried to make sense of what was happening. I checked my GPS again, but it showed me in a completely different state than where I should be. My phone had no signal, and the CB radio crackled with nothing but static. The landscape around me seemed to shift suddenly. Cacti appeared and disappeared, rock formations changed shape. I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. That's when I spotted another vehicle in the distance, the beat-up station wagon. Relief washed over me as I pulled up alongside it. The driver, a middle-aged woman named Evelyn, looked as confused and frightened as I felt. We pulled over at what appeared to be an abandoned gas station to compare notes. Evelyn had been driving to her sister's wedding, but had been on this strange highway for what felt like days. As we talked, more vehicles appeared: a college student named Zach in a rusty pickup, an elderly couple Frank and Marge in a luxury sedan, and a young mother named Tanya with her toddler in a minivan. Each of them had a similar story. They'd entered this highway and couldn't seem to find their way off. We decided to band together, forming a small convoy in hopes of finding an exit. As we drove, we shared our stories and theories. Zach, tech-savvy and paranoid, insisted it was some kind of government experiment. Frank, a retired engineer, argued it was an elaborate construction detour gone wrong. Tanya, sleep-deprived and anxious, was convinced we were all part of some twisted reality TV show. I tried to keep a level head, but fear was creeping in. Our fuel gauges never seemed to empty, but our supplies were running low. The days blurred together, and the only constants were the endless road and the increasingly desperate faces of my fellow travelers. We started to notice other oddities. Abandoned vehicles would appear on the roadside, only to vanish when we tried to investigate. We'd pass the same landmarks over and over, despite driving in what seemed to be a straight line. The weather remained unnaturally constant, oppressive, dry heat that never relented. As our situation became more desperate, tensions in our group rose. Arguments broke out over which direction to take, whether to keep driving or try to walk out of this nightmare. The strain was visible on everyone's faces. Evelyn's once neat appearance became disheveled, Zach's jokes turned bitter, and the light in Tanya's eyes dimmed as her child grew more listless. I found myself taking on the role of mediator, trying to keep our fragile group together. But as days turned into weeks, I began to wonder if we'd ever escape this endless drive. Just when it seemed all hope was lost, we spotted something in the distance, a city skyline shimmering on the horizon. Elated, we sped towards it, our spirits lifting for the first time in weeks. But as we got closer, our joy turned to horror. The city wasn't salvation, it was a massive junkyard of abandoned vehicles stretching as far as the eye could see. And among the wreckage, we saw movement, gaunt, desperate figures, other travelers who had been trapped here far longer than us. Some approached our vehicles, their eyes hollow with despair, hands reaching out in silent pleas. Others simply wandered aimlessly among the rusted hulks, as if they'd forgotten there was anything else in the world. We realized with sickening clarity that we weren't the first to be caught in this trap, and we might never escape. We're still driving, searching for a way out. Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever escape, or if this highway has become our new reality. But I won't give up. I've taken on the role of guardian for our little group, determined to find a way home. If you're reading this, beware of lonely desert highways that seem to go on forever. You might just find yourself on a long drive to nowhere, joining us in this purgatory of endless asphalt and shattered dreams. The crunch of gravel under my feet was the only sound breaking the eerie silence of Willowbrook Gardens. As I rounded the corner of the dilapidated Victorian greenhouse, my flashlight beam caught something that made my blood run cold. A trail of muddy footprints led away from a freshly dug patch of earth. My mind raced. I was the only one supposed to be here tonight. Or so I thought. That's when I heard it, a muffled sob coming from deep within the overgrown maze. Against my better judgment, I stepped off the path. Little did I know, I was walking straight into a nightmare that would haunt me for years to come. Willowbrook used to be the pride of our town. I remember coming here as a kid, marveling at the exotic plants and perfectly manicured lawns. But budget cuts hit hard, and now it's a shadow of its former self. Overgrown and understaffed, it's more like a jungle than a botanical garden. When I landed this gig, I thought I'd hit the jackpot. Easy money for a college kid like me, right? Just walk around for a few hours, shine my flashlight into dark corners, and collect my paycheck. The first 2 nights were uneventful, if a bit creepy. The way the moonlight cast shadows through the leaves, creating strange patterns on the ground, it was enough to make anyone jumpy. But that 3rd night? That's when things got weird. It started with the Victorian greenhouse. As I passed by, I heard a crash from inside. Glass breaking, maybe? I radioed it into Marge, my supervisor. Probably just a branch falling, she said, her voice crackling through the static. I'll check it out in the morning. I should have left it at that. But curiosity got the better of me. I approached the greenhouse, my flashlight beam dancing across its grimy windows. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound echoing in the still night air. Inside, the air was thick and humid. Vines had taken over, crawling up the metal framework and obscuring the glass panels. My light caught something reflective on the ground. Shards of a broken pot, scattered among the dirt and leaves. But no fallen branch. That's when I noticed the footprints. Small, like a woman's or a teenager's, leading away from the broken pot and disappearing into the dense foliage at the back of the greenhouse. My heart raced. Was someone else here? I followed the trail, pushing through overgrown ferns and ducking under low-hanging vines. The footprints led to a rusted door I'd never noticed before, half hidden behind a massive philodendron. It was slightly ajar. With trembling hands, I reached for the handle. Just as my fingers brushed the cool metal, a sound froze me in place. Voices. Hushed, urgent, coming from somewhere beyond the door. I held my breath, straining to hear. But the words were muffled and distinct. One thing was clear, though I wasn't alone in Willowbrook tonight. I backed away from the door, my mind racing. Should I confront them? Call the police? I decided to gather more information first. Over the next few nights, I started noticing patterns. The strange occurrences always happened in the northwest section of the garden, near the old Victorian greenhouse. I'd find cigarette butts and empty beer cans hidden in the bushes, clear signs that someone was using the garden after hours. One night, I stumbled upon a clearing I'd never seen before. It was well hidden, surrounded by dense shrubbery. The ground was disturbed, like someone had been digging recently. That's when I found the backpack, tucked away beneath a gnarled old oak tree. My hands shook as I unzipped it, revealing bolt cutters, rope, and duct tape. This was serious. I reported my findings to Marge the next morning. She listened, her face impassive, then said, "You're imagining things, kid. Probably just some teens messing around. Don't worry about it." But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. I started doing my own research, digging into Willowbrook's history. That's when I found the news articles. Apparently, the garden had been a hotspot for drug deals a few years back. The activity had died down, but what if it was starting up again? I knew I was in over my head, but I couldn't let it go. So I set up my own surveillance. I hid my phone in a bush near the clearing, set to record video all night. When I checked the footage the next day, my blood ran cold. Shadowy figures, moving with purpose through the garden. They knew exactly where they were going. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow them. The next night, I hid near the clearing, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they'd hear it. 2 groups arrived, facing off in tense silence. Money changed hands, followed by a package. I couldn't see what it was, but I had a pretty good idea. I tried to back away quietly, to pretend I'd never seen any of this. But in my haste, I stepped on a twig. The sharp cracks seemed to echo through the entire garden. The voices stopped abruptly. Panic surged through me as I turned and ran, branches whipping my face. I could hear them behind me, heavy footsteps and angry shouts growing closer. I burst into the main courtyard, fumbling for my radio, ready to call for help. That's when I saw Marge, standing with the group from the clearing. Our eyes met, and in that moment, everything clicked into place. She wasn't dismissive of my concerns earlier, she was protecting them. Protecting herself. "Ethan," she said, her voice eerily calm, "we need to talk." The others emerged from the shadows, surrounding me. I realized with growing horror that my night shift had just become a fight for survival. These weren't just drug dealers, this was organized, with roots deep in the community. And I had just stumbled into the middle of it all. I made it out of the garden that night, but everything changed. I quit the job, obviously. Told the police what I saw, but without proof, it was my word against Marge's. The investigation is ongoing, they say. But sometimes, when I walk past Willowbrook, I swear I can feel eyes on me. And at night, I still dream of rustling leaves and whispered conversations, wondering what secrets those overgrown paths still hide. The garden stands there, silent and overgrown, but I know now that appearances can be deceiving. In the end, the scariest monsters aren't the ones hiding in the shadows, but the ones hiding in plain sight. The crumpled map trembled in my hands as I squinted through the windshield, trying to make sense of the unfamiliar road ahead. My phone had died hours ago, leaving me at the mercy of this outdated paper relic. The fog pressed in, thick as cotton, muffling the world beyond my headlights. That's when I saw it, a silhouette emerging from the mist. A toll booth? Out here? As I slowed to a stop, a chill ran down my spine. The booth attendant's eyes met mine, and in that moment, I knew I'd made a terrible mistake. Some tolls, it turns out, can't be paid with spare change. I chuckled nervously, assuming it was some local's idea of a joke. Come on, man. It's late, and I'm just trying to get home. How much for the toll? The collector's face remained impassive. This bridge isn't on any map, friend. It's old, dangerous. Crossing is at your own risk, and the price, well, it's something precious. I glanced back the way I came, but the fog had thickened, swallowing the road behind me. My GPS was useless, the screen showing nothing but static. I was already lost, and turning back seemed pointless. Look, I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I really need to get through. I'll pay whatever reasonable toll you want. A cherished memory, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's the toll for now. I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. A memory? What are you talking about? Tell me about your first kiss. Describe it in detail, and you may pass. I almost laughed, but something in his eyes stopped me. There was an intensity there, and hunger that made my skin crawl. But what choice did I have? I was lost, low on gas, and this bridge seemed to be my only way forward. Fine, I sighed. My first kiss. It was summer, I was 15. As I spoke, describing the nervous excitement, the smell of sunscreen and cotton candy, something strange happened. The memory began to fade, like a photograph left too long in the sun. I struggled to recall details I'd known moments before, the color of her eyes, the song playing in the background. By the time I finished speaking, the memory felt distant, almost like it belonged to someone else. The collector nodded slowly. You may pass. Unsettled, I drove onto the bridge. The metal creaked ominously beneath my tires, and I gripped the steering wheel tightly. Halfway across, I noticed strange markings on the guardrails, tally marks and desperate messages scratched into the paint. Some were faded, barely legible. Turn back, no way out, he takes everything. My heart raced. What had I gotten myself into? I pressed down on the accelerator, eager to put this bridge and its creepy attendant behind me. But as I neared the other side, my blood ran cold. There, emerging from the mist, was another toll booth. And inside, waiting, was the same collector. My car sputtered to a stop just before the second booth. Panic set in as I tried to restart it, all too aware of my precarious position on this eerie bridge. The engine whined but refused to turn over. Cursing under my breath, I popped the hood and stepped out. The wind whipped around me, carrying whispers that seemed just out of earshot. Fragments of pleas and conversations drifted by, sending chills down my spine. I pretended to fiddle with the engine, buying time to think. Suddenly, the car roared to life on its own. I slammed the hood shut and jumped back in, ready to floor it past the booth. But as I shifted into drive, the collector emerged, his hollow eyes fixed on me. Another toll, he rasped. A year of your life. "This is insane," I shouted, trying to mask my fear with anger. "I've already paid. Let me through." I attempted to swerve around the booth, but my car wouldn't budge. It was like it was glued to the spot. The fog pressed in, obscuring everything but the booth and the collector's gaunt face. "A year," he repeated. "Or turn back. Choose." My mind raced. None of this made sense. But the longer I sat there, the more I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. What if I was having some kind of breakdown? What if this was all in my head? "Fine," I growled, desperation winning out. "Take your damn year. Just let me go." The moment the words left my mouth, exhaustion crashed over me like a wave. My vision blurred, and when it cleared, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. New lines creased my face, and strands of gray peppered my hair. Heart pounding, I drove on, praying to find a town or highway. But the road stretched endlessly, my phone remained without signal, and the gas gauge dipped dangerously low. Just as the engine began to sputter, I saw another bridge loom ahead. My stomach dropped as I realized it was the same one. Somehow, impossibly, I'd looped back. The collector appeared as I coasted to a stop, gas tank empty. His eyes gleamed with a terrible hunger. "The final toll," he announced. "Choose, sacrifice a loved one's safety, or remain on this bridge. Forever." "No more," I snarled, fear giving way to rage. "I'm done playing your sick game. I'm calling the cops, exposing whatever this is." The collector's laughter was dry and humorless. "You think you're the first to threaten that?" He removed his hat, revealing a face decades older than it should be. "I was like you once. A traveler who made the wrong choice." He explained that the bridge was a forgotten remnant of an old coastal road, long replaced by a new highway. Those who found it were lost souls, doomed to drive in circles until they gave up everything or took his place. "You have one last choice," he said, extending a hand. "Become the new collector. Escape the loop, but at a terrible cost. Or keep driving until there's nothing left of you to give." I made my choice that night on the bridge. Sometimes, when fog rolls thick off the coast, I swear I can still hear the creaking of metal and whispers of lost travelers. But whether I'm standing in a toll booth or safe at home, I can never be sure. All I know is that every decision has its price, and some roads, once taken, can never be untraveled. So if you're ever driving late at night and your GPS suggests a shortcut, think twice. Because you never know where that road might lead, or what it might cost to turn back. Like the story? Hit like and subscribe. See you in the next story popping up on your screen at this exact moment.